Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to the learning edition of 5-Minute Psych. In this 5-minute segment, we'll look at different types of learning, starting with learning that is non-associative, as is the case with habituation and sensitization. Then we'll compare two types of associative learning, classical and operant conditioning, before looking at observational learning. Learning can be defined as a lasting change in the mechanism that causes behavior due to previous experience. In other words, without this experience, the change in the mechanism of behavior wouldn't happen. And the change is said to happen in the mechanism of behavior, not just the behavior itself, because the change is thought to happen more centrally than that, like in the mind. Functionally, learning is the perfect tool to adapt to an ever-changing environment, as it allows animals to deal with novel situations. Although non-associative learning doesn't involve forming associations between stimuli, it still shows evidence of learning when your response to the same stimulus changes over time. We'll look at two types of non-associative learning, habituation and sensitization. With habituation, you see a decrease in the response to repeated exposure to the same stimulus over time. As an example, imagine you buy a new clock that makes a distinct chime every hour. At first, it wakes you up all night, but after a few nights, you don't even notice it anymore. That's habituation. You've gotten used to the sound and you don't react anymore. With sensitization, this is an increase in the response to repeated exposure to the same stimulus over time. And this usually happens when our system is aroused. For instance, imagine you have a neighbor with a barky dog. Normally, the barking doesn't bother you, and you barely react to it. But this one night, you were watching a scary movie about werewolves eating people, and when the neighbor's dog barked, you just about hit the roof in fear. That would be sensitization. Your reaction to the same barking stimulus increased over time because you were aroused from the scary movie. With associative learning, now you'll see a change in behavior that's caused by linking two things or events together. We'll go over two types of associative learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. With classical conditioning, two stimuli or things are associated with each other because one stimulus, a neutral one, like a light or a tone, reliably predicts the arrival of an important stimulus, like food or shock. So at first, the light might mean nothing, but if it always turned on a few seconds before a big serving of food arrived, then the light and food can become associated through classical conditioning. When this happens, the light alone can act like the food, and this is highly adaptive because now you can get ready for the food ahead of time, and I don't mean setting the table. I mean, your digestive processes are already started when you know you're about to eat, and this allows more nutrients to be absorbed from the food. With operant conditioning, the change in behavior that you'll see is caused by linking a behavior or response with the consequence of that behavior. So, if you push a button and you always get ice cream afterward, and you like ice cream, then you're going to push the button more often. But if you push the button and you get a shock afterward, then you won't push it again. Learning about the consequences of behaviors allows animals to adjust their behavior accordingly, either do some things more or less often, depending on the consequences that reliably follow. Finally, observational learning is considered by many researchers to be a more cognitive type of learning because it occurs by watching a model. That's it. No direct consequences to the learner, which is highly adaptive because it means we don't have to experience everything firsthand. We can learn just from watching others. It's considered to be more cognitive because it requires being able to represent in your mind what you saw and then use that information later on. For instance, you could learn to knit by watching someone else do it and then copying them. Well, we just looked at two types of non-associative learning, habituation and sensitization, as well as two types of associative learning, classical and operant conditioning. Then we ended with a look at observational learning. Now, aren't you glad you had 5 minutes?